What's going on, guys? This is Ryan with Ride Tech, and today we have a review of the Tang mouse pads from Esports Tiger, both the Tang X and the SR. And I think ultimately the question, whenever it came to them releasing both of these pads, is typically when you see mouse pads get dropped, you see either a whole line get updated where you have like the V1 and the V2. And I think in this case it's a little bit different because we had the initial Tung Dao and then again the X and the SR. So was it worth it? Let's get into it. All right, so getting into the pads, there's going to be a couple of similarities. So first and foremost, outside of the color, they both come in at 480 by 400, so it's going to be the same size. They also use the same base, but there's a little bit of a difference between both pads. The stitching is going to be the same, and outside of that, there's a little bit of difference in terms of how they play in terms of performance. First and foremost, I wanted to focus on the X pad first. When we're talking about mouse pads, there's a couple of things that are typical of what you would use, right? So if you want something that's going to be a fast pad, you're going to probably see the thickness of that pad being around 3 to 3.5 millimeters. Typically, the thinner the pad, the faster it's going to be. Whenever you're talking about a control pad, typically that's also going to be around 3.5 to 4 millimeters, depending on how they're trying to use the base of the pad in terms of how the pad performs. So typically like 3.5 is essentially the middle, 4 is going to be control, 3 is going to be more fast. That's what you would typically see. So when we see most control pads, again, falling in the 3.5 to 4 millimeter range, and this comes in at 6, I didn't know what to expect, honestly. And after using this pad, I've honestly been really impressed. Using this pad, again, coming in at 6 millimeters, I thought it was going to be really slow. I thought it might be really muddy. It might be, really slow. I'm not going to have a whole lot of speed. And honestly, it's not the case at all. This is similar in a sense to something like a Saturn Pro, and that when you push into the pad, you're going to have more controls. You push in, you're going to have a lot more cushion from the base on this pad than you would the SR. And honestly, I mean, at least in terms of overall glide, like you can tell, I mean, it's not super muddy. I mean, it's not super slow. But I mean, it's still a control pad. It still gives you that control. It still gives you that speed. And this has been a really interesting pad for me to use, just because, again, just whenever I knew that this was going to be 6 millimeters, I really did think that it was going to be really slow. And that's not the case. I mean, it's a very good pad. In terms of the base, again, you are going to have that extra control from pushing in, at least in terms of the performance of the pad. It has a fairly decent glide, and at least in terms of speed and control, it has good stopping power. It does feel open. It doesn't feel it's not a mud pad whatsoever. And I mean, this is a very good quality pad. One of the things that I've noticed, at least in terms of some of the skates that I've used, is I can feel it kind of like scratching up against either like the corner. So I think either on this or maybe on like the WL mouse, if I push in too much, like I can feel it like scratching up against the mouse. But again, it's not going to significantly affect your gameplay. Again, it's not going to be a huge factor. Like it's not going to kill your gameplay. It is just something that I wanted to mention. You might feel a little bit of it up against your arm, but whenever you're playing, you're not really going to have that, again, really affect your gameplay. The quality of the pad, the stitching is well done. You have a decent amount of speed whenever we're talking about a control pad, as well as on top of that, it's a pretty open pad. It doesn't feel very closed. It doesn't feel muddy at all. So, I mean, this is a very, very good performing pad. So the one thing that I did want to mention is just the base. So there is a little bit of a difference. The X has the Esports Tiger across the pad, so you can kind of see up against the light. You can kind of see the letters. One thing that's different on the SR is they do have a different backing on the base. So this is definitely more rubberized than this one. This feels, I mean, it feels a little grippy, but this one just definitely sticks to your desk a little bit better. And again, I mean, whenever we're talking about this pad, as we get into the SR, it's again going to have all the same similarities. It's going to have the same stitching. It's going to have the same base. The one thing that I would mention is, at least with this pad, as I mentioned before, when we're talking about pads in general and we're talking about the difference between a 6 and a 4, this is going to be a little bit faster than the X. And so if you're looking for a control pad and you're looking for a little bit of a slower pad, you'll want to go with an X. If you want something a little bit faster, you can go with an SR. I would mention this because it's a 4mm base. I haven't recognized that same scratching up against skates whenever I've been using different mice. So it's only something that I've noticed on the X. And whenever we're talking about performance, again, this is going to still have a lot of control. It's not muddy. It still feels very open in terms of micro adjustments, and in overall gameplay, it is a little bit faster. It doesn't have a 6mm base, so just like other pads, you don't feel it as much up against the bottom of your arm whenever you're playing. And at least in terms of overall gameplay, this feels very, very good, and you get a little bit more speed than you would with the regular X. The Tang Daos. When we're talking about being able to have a control pad, especially when you're switching in between games, honestly, it's a good thing to be able to not just have one pad and be able to switch back and forth depending on the game that you're playing and the kind of speed of control that you want, depending on the game that you play, whether that's the far end of the spectrum when you're using like a glass pad for something really fast, or you want something really slow, like something like a Riz from the Whale. In this case, having a control pad where you can flip between more control and having the same amount of control with a little bit more speed feels really good, honestly. I mean, being able to use two pads that are almost identical, but because of that smaller base and the SR having that little bit more speed in this pad and being able to switch back and forth, honestly feels really good. Even as I've been playing, again, whenever I play things like the finals, Apex, Fortnite, whatever, if I feel like, hey, I need a little bit more control, move to the X. Hey, I feel like I'm not target switching fast enough. I need a little bit more speed, move to the SR. Being able to have that flexibility with a similar pad, personally, I feel like really helps because you're not switching to an entirely different pad. You're not switching to an entirely different feel. You're not switching to a different base. You're not switching to a different surface of the pad. It is essentially the same pad with a slightly different speed, and it feels great, honestly. So if you're interested in either of these pads, I'll throw them in the comment section below. Again, let me know what you thought about the video. So I did think the last video, I felt like the video was kind of zoomed in a little too much, so I tried to pull it back because I felt like whenever I was trying to do hand motions and stuff, like I felt like it was like this, like you didn't really see a whole lot. So I wanted to make sure that, again, I'm taking each video, each review that I make, I'm making little adjustments here and there, making it better with every single review. So all that being said, I appreciate all of you. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to throw them in the comment section below. I always appreciate being able to talk with everyone, just being able to talk about pads, talk about mice. So whatever it is, feel free to throw them in the comment section below. At least in the upcoming weeks, I have the Neptune as well as the Crucible from Pat Smith. So we have those two coming out. We have a couple surprises in the next week or two. So make sure that you're following on YouTube as well as Twitter, because we do have some crazy things that we're about to do. So with that, I will catch you all next week. Peace.